Thank you, everyone. Welcome to today's public hearings before the Raleigh City Council. We will start off with our first item, which is a utility extension agreement. And I'm just going to say no one has signed up in opposition on this. So if we could have just a brief presentation.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I am Aaron Brower with Raleigh Water and here to present you information in regards to the Kinsley Subdivision Utility Extension Agreement. Just a few things to go over briefly, as you all are familiar with the Utility Extension Agreement process, but it has been a little over a year. This was adopted in 2013. It replaced our old joint venture policy that some of you may be familiar with. The only difference between the joint venture policy and our current one is that the old joint venture policy allowed for special assessments that could then be reimbursed back to the developer, which is no longer the case. And also, it is this one requires a public hearing. Good gracious, sorry. The other things of note. The main objective of this policy is to minimize pump stations and promote orderly growth of the sanitary sewer system when off-site easements are needed for private development, but the private developers cannot acquire those easements. It avoids long-term pump station operation and maintenance costs, odor control issues, increases environmental protection because we're not relying on mechanical and electrical equipment, and also it requires the developer to make a good faith effort to acquire any off-site easements, which is partially why we're here today. Should the developer be unsuccessful in acquiring the off-site sewer easements, the city may enter into an agreement with the developer to extend service to the property. The cost of this extension is paid for by the developer, but is constructed and administered by the city. And it does include a public hearing, as I mentioned earlier, and authorization from council today doesn't, to enter into a utility extension doesn't prevent the developer from continuing to work with the underlying property owners. Here's a property overview. This is within the town of Wake Forest. It is right on the Franklin County line and is bisected by US 1A, which is North Main Street. It consists, the proposed development consists of 724 townhomes and single-family lots. The Wake County Forest Board of Commissioners rezoned and annexed this property on February 2nd, 2021. As you're aware, Raleigh Water is contractually obligated to serve the property since it has been annexed and it is within the utility service area of the merger agreement. The sewer extension in question is shown here in red. This first oval is an off-site easement that needs to be acquired by the developer. The town of Wake Forest does own that property, and therefore there haven't been any issues or will not be any issues associated with obtaining that off-site easement. The other one just circled there in oval is a private property owner that the developer has been working with for several months and has provided monetary offers to. And early in the negotiations, the property owner was engaged in conversations, but that has since changed over the last few months. An offer was sent, as well as multiple emails and other means of communications, and I believe the developer has somebody on the line as well if you have any questions regarding their good faith effort. Just to note, the extension here is roughly 500 feet from the existing sanitary sewer in the town of Wake Forest over to the larger property to the east that's bordered by the pond that you can see on the far right side of the page. So staff's recommendation is to acknowledge that the developer has made a good faith effort to acquire their sanitary sewer easement and authorize the city manager to enter into a utility extension agreement with 1258 North Main Development, LLC. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the developer is also on the line as well.
Okay. Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Cox?
Yes, do we have any indication as to why the property owner is not participating in this meeting today?
I reached out to the property owner personally to let him know that this meeting was being held, and I did not receive a response, and that's been about a week and a half ago.
Okay, when you reached out, was that a phone call or a...
I emailed him, which has been his preferred method of communication.
Okay.
We have one person signed up in support. That would be Tommy Craven. So I'm going to open the hearing. Is Tommy on the line?
I am. Thank you, Mayor. My firm, Priest Craven and Associates, are assisting 1258 North Main with the preparation of the plans and approvals for this subdivision. The sewer extension will serve not only their development, but also existing single-family homes in that area that are on well and septic tank and will need public sewer and water in the future, and also several undeveloped properties in that drainage basin. And they and we are supportive of Raleigh Water's process and request of this council, and hope that you will be too. Certainly, we're here and available to answer any questions that you might have for us.
Okay. Does any council members have a question of Mr. Craven? Not? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Don't be shy, folks. Councilmember Branch? Councilmember Ford, is that a second? Peace sign, second. Yeah, okay. Councilmember Branch has made the motion to approve. Councilmember Ford has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you. All right, the next item is the annexation petition AX 921-712 Wilson Street.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. My name is Christopher Golden with Planning and Development. The annexation that you have before you is at 712 Wilson Street. It's roughly just under a quarter of an acre. There's an existing single-family resident on the property, or residents on the property. They're looking to hook up to water and sewer, which is immediately adjacent to the site. If the zoning is R10, if this lot is annexed into the city today, it will be incorporated into the boundaries of Council District C. And if you all have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, no one has signed up to speak in support or in opposition. I'm going to open the hearing and close it. Do we have a motion?
For approval.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Fort, who now has this down. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay. Clerk, that was unanimous.
Thank you.
Next, we have street closing 0421 Greenway Avenue, Holloway Terrace, Country Club Court. And again, no one has signed up to speak in support or opposition.
Good afternoon. This is Jason Myers in the City's Department of Transportation. I have a couple of very brief slides that can explain what this case is about. So this is in the area known as Country Club Homes in a right-of-way that was platted in 1949. Greenway and Country Club and Holloway are city-maintained streets right now, but there is a development application in for 526 dwelling units that would replat streets in a different location. The only thing that is in this resolution of concern maybe is some stormwater and utility easements that are required if the utilities are not moved. And these are the conditions of permanent street closures from the comprehensive plan. Can I answer any questions for council?
Do you have any questions for Jason? Okay. Again, no one has signed up to speak in support or in opposition, so I will open the hearing and close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Knight? Motion to approve. Do we have a second? Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Next, we have street
And-
closing. Oh,
I was going to say that the next case is STC 10 for Old Harrison Avenue.
yes.
And while I wait for the slides to come up, this is near a recent street closure that City Council acted on to close a section of street called Old Harrison Avenue, and which was also called Morgan Street at times. It was found out after the closure in this area here that this piece that's hatched in red was also a public right-of-way and would needed to be closed as well. There are not any utilities needed on this. And let me clear the marking. And these are the conditions. Can I answer any questions for City Council?
Do we have any questions? Okay, I have two people signed up in support, Isabel Maddox and Greg Sandruder. I'm going to open the hearing. Do you have any questions for the applicant? Okay, no questions for the applicant. I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion to approve? Councilmember Fort, do we have a second? Councilmember Branch has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is rezoning Z 5520 Lake Wheeler Road.
Good afternoon. This is Travis Crane in Planning and Development, pinch hitting for Bynum Walter today. I'll pause a second for the presentation to open for Z55. All right. So Z5520 is a request to rezone approximately 5 acres of land from residential 4 and residential mixed use 3 stories to residential mixed use 3 stories conditional use. The overlay districts, the special residential parking overlay district and the SHOD 2 overlays would remain in place, and Planning Commission recommends approval of this request 6-1. This property may look familiar to some of you. This was the subject of a zoning request a few years ago that went through the process. So there is a mix of zoning in the area. I mentioned the zoning on this property. There's some industrial mixed use to the north, 3 stories with conditions, some commercial mixed use across from Lake Wheeler Road, and some RX3 to the south and to the west of this property. And finally, there's a small spot of neighborhood mixed use 3 stories, which is a recent rezoning down on the south side of Carolina Pines Avenue. So here's a larger look at the area, an aerial view. The site is outlined in yellow. You see that it's a mostly wooded site. There is a structure on the property, and then there's a fair amount of industrial uses and flex warehouses to the north of this property, with residential by and large across Lake Wheeler Road. First, you see some multifamily residential just south of I-40, and then some single-family detached as you move away from that. So here are just a few pictures of the site. You see it highlighted there with the yellow arrow. As I mentioned, mostly wooded. There are a few structures on the property that are single-family in nature, but it is what I'll call an underdeveloped site. The applicant has offered a condition that Bat Street will be limited to pedestrian and emergency access. Bat Street is that tail of the property that extends further to the south, and that if a public street connection is possible in the future, vehicular access would be permitted at that point in time. So here's a comparative between existing zoning in the center column and proposed on the right. I mentioned this is a request to RX3 conditional use. Units per acre would increase with this request, as would the maximum number of residential units on the property. The amount of ancillary office or retail would stay the same, and setbacks would be reduced. So as part of our staff reports, we're starting some additional environmental screens. The carbon emission analysis is a portion of the staff report that you'll start to see a little bit more consistently with some of our newer cases. The property does have a higher walk score than average, higher transit score, and smaller and efficient units would be permitted as a result of this rezoning. Affordability analysis, kind of in the same veins as that environmental screen. This would add to housing supply, would permit a variety of housing types, would allow for smaller lots than the citywide average, and is within walking distance of transit. This request does not include subsidized units, and it would allow for more units, more building types in this area. So this property is shown as moderate density residential on the future land use map. This request is consistent with that in terms of use, but the density portion of the request is inconsistent with that category. There is no urban form designation for this property. And as always, we perform as a staff the analysis of consistency with comprehensive plan policies. Staff has opined, and the Planning Commission has affirmed that there are consistency amongst policies related to land use, environmental protection, and housing. And I mentioned that part consistency with the future land use map, meaning that the use is envisioned on the future land use map, but the density is not. So as a result, there would be a future land use map amendment if this rezoning request were approved, and this property would be shown as appropriate for medium density residential in the future. So as I mentioned, Planning Commission recommends approval of this request. The findings are here on the screen. There was one vote that dissented, and that commissioner was concerned about the Dix area study, the Dix Edge study, and the fact that it has not completed yet, and was uncertain as to what that study might recommend in the future as it relates to this case. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for Travis? Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, did you have a question?
Not a question, just want to appreciate staff's slides on the affordability and the climate analysis. That's really awesome. Thank you.
I'll second that. That actually provides a lot of really good information. Thank you. Okay, I have one person signed up to speak in support, Randy Herman. I'm going to open the hearing. Is Mr. Herman representing the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask if there are any questions for Mr. Herman. No questions. Mr. Herman, I'm going to close the hearing.
Okay.
Do we have a motion? Councilmember Fort, motion
Yes,
to
yes,
go on.
ma'am.
Sorry.
It'll be my motion to approve. One of the things I did want to say is that I've heard from some folks in the district who are in support of this rezoning, and some of those folks are working closely with the Dix Edge area study. And so I've gotten some feedback from them on a positive note. Certainly they would like for planning staff and transportation staff and the Dix folks to continue working with the community as Dix is being further developed. So this is my motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 17, 2021, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval was also deemed an amendment for the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Knight has seconded that. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, clerk, that is unanimous. Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z121 at 5060 Edwards Mill Road. I have 6 people signed up to speak in support. No one signed to speak up in opposition. So, Travis?
Thank you. So this is a request at 5060 Edwards Mill Road, highlighted here on your map. It's a request to rezone almost 15 acres of property from residential 6 to commercial mixed-use 7-story and commercial mixed-use 12-story, both with conditions. This parcel is located within the Crabtree Area Plan, and Planning Commission recommends approval 8-0 of this request. So here's an aerial of the property. Property is shown with the yellow outline. We're just up the hill from Crabtree Valley Mall, Glenwood Avenue, on the top and right of your screen, with Creedmoor and Edwards Mill teeing into that. The applicant here has offered proposed conditions that would limit the number of residential dwelling units on the property, would limit the amount of restaurant and retail sales by square footage on the property, similarly limit office uses to 360,000 square feet. Applicant has offered a trip generation budget, which is something that occurs on occasion with properties that may be in a constrained location where there's a fair amount of transportation impact. So the applicant has offered a limitation on number of peak hour trips to the property. It prohibited certain uses on the property, and then also required that any building that's in excess of 5 stories be served with a parking structure. There's a condition that relates to building height within the CX7 portion of the property that's directly adjacent to the existing single-family residential, and that is the building height in that location shall not exceed 6 stories in height. Any upper story of structured parking shall be screened so as to hide vehicles and shield lighting. There's an allowance for 2 bays of parking between the street, 200 feet of the street and the building, and then a requirement for direct public access. And I mentioned the trip generation budget that we've already gone over. It's going to be recorded as a restrictive covenant on the property. So here's an exhibit that is included within the application packet, and it just shows the area that will be zoned CX7. And there's a 200-foot distance from the R6 properties where a 6-story building would be permitted. Now remember that the residential transition would still apply at the edge of that CX7, so directly adjacent to these properties here, the R6 properties in yellow, will be required to have a residential transition in place. That's a 50-foot building separation. And then CX12 would happen, a 12-story building would happen elsewhere on the property. So Planning Commission reviewed this request, and they recommend unanimously that the case be approved. They found it reasonable in the public interest and cited certain policies that were consistent, contained within the plan. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Councilmember Cox.
Yes, obviously, this is near the mall and Crabtree Creek, and I'm wondering about the stormwater situation. I mean, obviously there's flooding in this area, and with a lot of development, how is stormwater going to be addressed?
Certainly, that's a good question, and obviously stormwater is a component of the development regulations contained within the Unified Development Ordinance. I know that Wayne Miles is here, and he's making his way up to the podium, and he can answer any specific technical questions about that.
Good afternoon, Wayne Miles, Engineering Services. The northern portion of this site is in the FEMA floodplain. As Mr. Crane mentioned, they would be subject to our stormwater detention requirements. However, because this site would be, even though there is downstream structural flooding, this site is less than 5% of the total drainage area of the downstream structural flooding. So it would not be subject to the additional UDO requirement to have detention up to the 100-year storm, but it would be subject to the provisions where they would either have to provide 2- and 10-year detention or show that providing that detention could be detrimental to downstream flooding.
So it would be 2 to 10-year retention, not 25-year or anything greater.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions for staff? Okay, I have people who have signed up to speak in favor. As I said, no one has signed up to speak in opposition. So I'm going to open the hearing. We have Tony Coleman, Ken Crockett, Rogers Edwards, Caroline Cheeves, Reinald Stevenson, and Tommy Craven here. Does anybody have a question for the applicant? Mayor Pro Tem Stewart?
Thank you, Mayor. I saw the long list of conditions that are being that have been submitted for this case, and I appreciate that. I did notice that there's nothing about no development in the floodplain, and I also saw in the staff memo that there was a mention that a zoning condition that would state that new development would utilize the existing building footprints to the extent possible would provide a greater measure of consistency with both policies and help maintain these areas in their present undisturbed state. And I wondered if the applicant could speak to both those items.
Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, this is Toby Coleman. Hope you're doing well. Good to see you all virtually. I'll speak very briefly to the second item, and then I'm going to ask Tommy Craven to address your question on the floodplain. In terms of the footprint, we did go back and forth. That was related to a set of conditions or set of consistency to the small area plan policies. The way that we are addressing that specific policy, which relates to the preservation of hillsides, is through the by limiting the amount of retail. We discourage the development of big box stores that would take up large footprints and require large amounts of grading. Therefore, that's the way we're addressing the preservation of hillsides. It's frankly, because there's only 76 units currently on the site, it's not practical to limit development just to those 76 garden apartments that are on site. I'll ask Tommy Craven to address the other question on the floodplain. As you know, most of you know this in great detail, and Tommy can speak to this probably in the detail you need, but the development is pretty restricted already in the floodplain, and there is a new road that's going to go along the southern edge of this property that is called for in city plans. And so a lot of, as we've outlined in our prior submissions to the city, really the only development that we anticipate occurring within the floodplain is that new public road that's within the city plans. But I'll hand it over to Tommy to address that.
Yes, thank you. The FEMA floodplain that is actually on this site is not what I would call an active floodplain. It's not a floodplain that is along the stream that's through this. It's more, it's backwater off of the floodplain of Crabtree Creek that is slightly downstream of this site. So there's just a finger of floodwater from Crabtree Creek that backs up into a low area on this site. And the only impact that we envision of that area is the extension of Stony Crest Road through this site and out to Edwards Mill Road. And it has to tie to Edwards Mill Road opposite the intersection that serves the other side of Edwards Mill. So we will be aligning those two intersections, or aligning that intersection. And that brings the road across that section of FEMA floodplain or FEMA backwater. And that crossing location has been in place for some years now based on the Edwards Mill Road improvements that were designed and programmed some time ago. And wetland permits for that crossing have already been obtained. They were obtained several years ago as well.
Okay. Was your question answered? Okay. Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Okay, I am going to close the, do you have a question, Councilmember Knight? You're on mute.
Ready to make a motion whenever appropriate.
Okay, I am closing the hearing then. Councilmember Knight?
Thank you. Yes, I've been in contact with the applicants. I feel comfortable with the project that they're trying to do. As y'all can see, they're surrounded by other mixed-use development and multifamily development in general. And so it's appropriate placing of this with what's surrounded. And also, just to make sure that they stay vigilant on any potential stormwater issues in this area. That's going to be very important as they move forward. And with that, Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 17th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Melton has seconded. All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that was unanimous. That was 7-1 with Councilmember Cox in opposition. Okay, thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z1521 North Blount and Delway Streets.
Thank you. This is a request to alter zoning conditions associated with a property that is located at Blount Street and Delway Street. This was previously rezoned as Z1111 with conditions, and the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request unanimously. So there's a wide mix of zoning in this area. Obviously, this property is zoned commercial mixed use 3 stories. With the zoning conditions, there's a similarly situated property to the south and east, some residential mixed use 3-story, some residential 6 with neighborhood conservation overlay district. That's part of the Mordecai subdivision, and some office mixed use and planned development in the area. So a real nice mixture of different zoning categories within this area. So here's an aerial of the site. It's outlined in yellow. On the south side of Delway, just to the east of Blount Street, and to the west of Person Street. So you can see that predominantly there's a small commercial core here at Person Street that I'm sure we all know and love. Wake Forest Road takes you to the north and east out of downtown. And then there's some denser housing directly to the north, single family to the east. William Peace University to the south and west. Here's just a close-up photo of the site. You can see how it's developed today. You might know this as the Raleigh City Farm site. And then there's a shopping center that's directly adjacent to the property on the north side of Franklin Street. So here are a few photos of the property. You can see it outlined here with that heavy yellow outline, just looking from different vantage points on Blount Street and on Delway. So I mentioned this is a request to amend zoning conditions associated with a previously zoned property. The request here would remove retail sales, eating establishment, bar, nightclub, lounge, tavern, and shopping center from the list of prohibited uses. Those were put in place back in 2011. Would remove the reference to unity of development plan. That was a relic of the former zoning code, the old Part 10 zoning code. Would remove a requirement for a public plaza on the site. And then would have additional requirements for the retail sales, eating establishments, bar, nightclubs, taverns, lounges. So those additional requirements here are really getting at the intention behind the change. The applicant has asked to restrict those uses, the retail sales, eating establishment, bar, nightclub, lounge, and tavern, to 2,750 square feet on an area in the southern 50 feet of the property, and they're calling that the Village Green. So you might see that reference throughout the zoning conditions. There's a limitation on hours of operation and a requirement for a 50-foot landscape buffer that's directly adjacent to properties in the area. There's a requirement for a solid wood fence along the rear of the property, and a requirement for a solid wood fence on the eastern boundary of this property. There's a limitation on string lights. They can be allowed, but shall be no higher than 12 feet. And a prohibition on any type of wood-burning fire, except for the existing masonry fireplace that's in place today. So here's just another look at the property, again, outlined in yellow. And what staff is showing here is the location of that Village Green area. And so that's where you could expect to see the activity that's described in the condition. So it's 50 feet from that southern property boundary and then 55 feet inward from the property. So comparing the existing zoning versus proposed, you're not seeing a ton of change here, except for that bottom row, the retail permission for 2,750 square feet. Otherwise, everything else is almost identical. This request is consistent with office and residential mixed use as the future land use category, and that's how all of these properties are designated. You see some neighborhood mixed use along Person Street, and this is directly adjacent to the central business district and south of some low density and medium density residential. This is also consistent with the transit emphasis corridor. This is Blunt Street as shown as appropriate as a transit emphasis corridor, as is Wake Forest Road and Person Street. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. It's consistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. And then here are a number of policies, mostly in land use, that are consistent, and there have been no inconsistent policies identified. Planning Commission recommends approval of this request 7-0, citing that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, with the future land use map, and that manages commercial impacts, design guidelines, and reinforces the urban pattern. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Okay, do we have any questions for Travis? Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, just so I understand, the Village Green box, that's the area where they're looking to build anything in. The rest of it, they're not looking to build anything?
Yes, sir, that's my understanding of the request, is that that Village Green area is where those additional uses would be permitted, and that's where the additional buffering would happen as well.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Travis? Okay, no one has signed up in opposition, but we did receive an email with some comments. Clerk, do you want to?
Yes, I was going to indicate this afternoon I did receive an email from adjacent property owners at 206 Delway Street, 807 and 809 Mordecai Drive in opposition. It's a fairly lengthy email. I'll be glad to read it or summarize their opposition. I think you might have received it also. I'm not totally sure.
Yes, I have received it. I don't know if others have. People are shaking their head yes.
Okay.
So I think it would be safe to say that there are concerns for these three owners about the, let me see, potential noise, smoke, disturbances, and then they have mentioned the amount of noise, smoke, alcohol-related outbursts, and other disturbances from the patrons has caused us all significant hardship, disturbed our lives. And they basically, they mentioned that the text change request includes provisions stating that there will be plantings at a height of 10 feet, and a 7 foot tall fence. Says the land drops 2 feet on the 206 property line, and a 7 foot fence would end up providing 5 feet or less of height screening for our residential property. There are stipulations for hours of operations, which they feel are too broad, from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And also asked about the number of people who would be allowed on the parcel. So that sums that up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open the hearing. We have 3 people signed up to speak in support: David Brown, John Holmes, Isabel Maddox. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, I was wondering if they could address some of the concerns, because it sounds like that the residents who sent the letter have reached out to the applicant as well. So I was wondering if they could address the issues that were brought up, that they're saying things were done illegally.
Yes, Isabel Maddox here on behalf of the applicant. Yes, Travis summarized the case reasonably well. And in response to the neighbor's request, first of all, this is because the prior zoning case applied to the entire city farm, we had to include that whole property in this text change zoning request. But our changes really are focused on a very small area. And if my presentation could come up, I'd like to identify the area we're talking about. Go to the next slide, please. That 50 by 55 foot area. During COVID, there was the owners of the shopping center, the Person Street Shopping Center to the immediate south, in trying to use that area a little bit to facilitate some outdoor dining. They had some benches and some lights, and would allow people to take their ice cream from Two Roosters or their coffee from Yellow Dog or their food from Standard Foods back there and sit and enjoy the outside in a spaced out manner. They thought the city's relaxation of rules because of COVID would apply to them. What they didn't really understand was that was a zoning condition, so they did not apply. They did get a notice of violation. They immediately ceased that and decided to go with this rezoning or this text change zoning to try to change some of those conditions. We feel like we have addressed their concerns. They did appear and strongly oppose the first planning commission meeting, and we did include some more conditions, and they did not appear at the second planning commission meeting, and we thought they were satisfied. And if you'll go to the next slide, I can tell you about some of the concerns. So we did limit operating hours 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. We provided a landscape buffer shall be provided along the east and north lines of the village green area with a 7.5 foot fence and a 10 foot at planting evergreens, which expected to grow to 20 feet. Also that a 7.5 foot solid fence would be extending on the east line of the Karchner property. And if you'll go to the next slide, you can see how those fences would work. The orange line represents fences, new fences. So you have one on the back of the village green, and you have one on the east side all the way to the front of the Karchner house being 208. So we feel like that buffers reasonably well. And I want to call on David Brown, our landscape architect, to talk about the topo of this property and how the fence and landscaping we feel will buffer Mr. Karchner's property and the other neighbor who fronts on Person Street. David?
Good afternoon, David Brown, Klein Design. I'd like to point out the diagram in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. That is an illustrative section of how the fence would work in relation to the two properties. The 206 property with the village green is to the left, and there is approximately a 2 foot grade change on our property ramping up to the adjoining lot at 208 Delway Street. We are proposing to place the solid wood fence on what I call the high side of the line. So I think it is actually very effective if you're in the backyard of 208. The other thing is that we have some very substantial plantings which are illustrated by the green plant symbols on the plan. I'll stop for a minute. I do want to return this conversation to Isabel, but just see if there are any questions about the buffer.
And I want to speak I want to also comment on the fire. The fireplace, we show the little red square on this as there's an existing masonry fireplace. And when the area was being used, which was out of compliance with the zoning conditions previously, they were building a fire on a ground level fire pit, which, you can do in pretty much anybody's backyard. But what we've committed to in this case is that we would not use the ground level fire pit any longer. We would only use the elevated masonry fireplace. And that would have the effect of releasing the smoke at a much higher level, and we think would cause way less disturbance to the neighborhood, because it would come out of the chimney. There's a chimney it's maybe total of 14 feet off the ground. I think that'll make a big difference in any kind of smoke going into the neighbor's yard. So I think if you go to the next slide, please, to summarize our case, we feel like this whole block is mixed use zoning. There's a shopping center to our immediate south. There's already a bar that's legally used right beside one of these complaining neighbors. And I think some of his concern might be that he's adjacent to a shopping center right now. Again, the fires in the outdoor fireplace would be permitted under the existing zoning. We would not have to revise our conditions to have fires on that property. The buffer plantings will be 10 feet at installation, expected to grow 25 to 30 feet at maturity. And we feel like this facilitates a neighborhood scale use in a very small outdoor space that will help facilitate outdoor uses, which I think all of us have come to really enjoy and appreciate during COVID. We feel like our conditions do address the issues that the neighbors raised: smoke, hours of operation, and substantial screening. And certainly available for more questions. And if you have any specific questions, Mr. Branch, that we didn't answer, please let me know what those might be.
Hey, could we thank you. I do have a question for the applicant. How many tables and how many patrons would be allowed? That was one of the questions that was asked.
And I'll call on John Holmes, who's the owner of the Person Street Shopping Center and this parcel. Mr. Holmes, are you on the line?
Yes. So we don't have a set number. I mean, there are, and it's not necessarily patrons. I mean, we wanted to try, the whole genesis of this was to try to create an outdoor amenity area that anyone could use. So you're not necessarily have to be coming from Yellow Dog or Two Roosters or Standard or any of the other centers. I mean, quite frankly, people go back there with their dogs that are walking through the neighborhood. And again, it's just an area to stop and sit down and, enjoy some outdoor area. We can certainly limit the amount. I don't know who's going to control that, because it's not, this area is not tied to a particular tenant of the adjacent shopping center. But my sense is, having seen it in use prior to getting the notice of violation, there were probably 30 to 40 people back there, maybe. I didn't.
It was set up with benches and tables, and so I don't know if there were 5 or 6 tables maybe back there.
1, 2, 3. They were probably 6 tables, 6 to 8 maybe.
So could you include a limitation on there that would be reasonable, that would allow you, 120 people back there is way different than 50.
I don't think we would have an objection to that, but the question would be a matter of enforcement, because it would be, I don't know if the city would want to police that, and since it's not one tenant space, it'd be a question of enforcement, I think. I don't think we would have an objection to the condition. It's just how would we police it and how would the city enforce it?
Okay, Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, it seems to me you could just put a sign up that says maximum occupancy 50 people at the entrance, or some sort of sign. It doesn't seem like that would be that difficult to do. The entrance to it would it be on the south side, or would there be multiple sides of it that you could access the green?
It would be only accessible from the south, because there will be fences on the north and east. I guess it may be you could come over from the city farm area from the west side, but that would be all.
Okay. Right now, behind the plaza, Person Street bar has that's an open air area that they are allowed to have their patrons can sit out there and
That's correct.
do it. Okay. And then the concrete block that's beside that, what's the use of that concrete block? Could that be used for those same purposes now?
Well, there is an area in the back of Standard Foods where there's a dumpster. If you'll go back to the aerial, I think it's the 2 slides back.
Well, I'm looking to the east side, where right behind, if you will, right beside Person Street Bar's open air space. Is that just a maintenance or space?
I'm going to ask Mr. Holmes to answer that.
Yeah, that's back of house for the other tenants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a fence along between the plaza and those residences right through there?
There is.
There is. Okay. So that fence would connect to the one that y'all would build if you did this. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if we could take the, thank you. Do we have any additional questions? So, where's Travis? So I'm just trying to figure out if they wanted to add a maximum number, what would be the protocol for doing that?
So if the applicant would like to add additional conditions, it would be appropriate to close the public hearing and then defer the request for 2 weeks or until your next meeting and allow the case to come back with the revised conditions.
All right, I don't want to do that.
And
go on, Councilmember Branch.
yeah, I was thinking, Madam Mayor, it may be best to have, I know we're talking about conditions, but I know our fire marshals, they look at area spaces and they can tell what's safe. I think that following that normal policy and protocol may be best here, where they go in and do an assessment of capacity and go that way. I think that would be the best approach. Since it is fenced in, it limits the number of ways of egress and things of that nature. So I think that would probably be the best approach.
Okay, I am going to close the hearing. Do I have a motion to approve? Councilmember Branch?
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 17, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action.
I missed, there were about 5 hands up doing this, so Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, okay, has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that was 7-1 with Councilmember Cox in opposition. Thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z1621 Conquest Drive.
Yes, ma'am. And this is a zoning request on Conquest. However, we did receive correspondence from the applicant before the meeting today that they wish to withdraw this petition. This is a new provision that's contained within the Unified Development Ordinance where the applicant can choose to withdraw a case even leading up to and after the public hearing. So the applicant has chosen to withdraw this case.
Okay, thank you. Do we have to do anything as part of that, or we just accept the withdrawal?
No, ma'am. From staff's perspective, it's just accept the withdrawal, and the case has been withdrawn.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z2221, 5601 and 5621 Atlantic Avenue. Again, I have no one signed up in opposition.
Thank you. This is another request to alter zoning conditions for a piece of property that's been previously rezoned. This is a piece of property or a collection of properties that's at, I'm sorry, we've just lost our presentation. There we go. Piece of property is located at Spring Forest Road and Atlantic Avenue. It's a few parcels that are currently zoned commercial mixed use, 3 stories with conditions. And this is within a larger retail area that also has that same zoning. So this was previously rezoned back in 2015 with case Z1515. So I mentioned it's 2 parcels, about 3.16 acres in size. Planning Commission recommends unanimous approval of this request. So looking at the area as a whole from a zoning standpoint, I mentioned commercial mixed-use zoning for this property, and directly to the north, there is also commercial mixed-use zoning across Atlantic Avenue to the south and east. Further north of Dixie Forest Road, there's some neighborhood mixed-use zoning with conditions, a small pocket of office mixed-use at Timber Ridge, and then some residential 10, residential 4 surrounding, and then a small area of residential mixed-use, 3-story conditional use south of Spring Forest. So here's an aerial of the site. There's a building that's currently on a portion of the site, commercial developed to the north on the south side of Dixie Forest, and then a smattering of office and commercial, some townhouses and single-family detached as you move further south of Spring Forest Road. Here's a closer look at that site. As I mentioned, it's got a building on it today. I believe it's an office building, but there's a portion of the site that's got some stormwater detention on it on its own parcel. So here's a look at a few pictures of the property looking from Atlantic and looking from Spring Forest. So you can see the totality of the property. You can see the building that's existing in that bottom picture. There's a nice oblique view of it. So I mentioned this does amend existing conditions. So it would increase the amount of allowable floor area for commercial in the building, would remove the requirement for compliance with parking limited frontage standards that were put in place previously, and replace it with some additional language related to the parking spaces that are constructed after this zoning case is approved. So comparing existing versus proposed, really the major change here is in the increase of office and retail potential square footage up to 20,000 square feet. Taking a look at that carbon emission analysis, this area does have a higher walk score and a higher bike score than average. This is located along an area or a couple of corridors that have fairly heavy bus service. There's Route 25L and the Triangle Town Link in the area. This request is consistent with community mixed use as a future land use map category, and much of the area is shown as appropriate for that type of use. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. A number of land use policies, no inconsistent policies were identified. And Planning Commission recommends unanimous approval 7-0, finding it consistent with the plan, consistent with the future land use map and certain policies, in that this would expand commercial services in an existing commercial node, encourage pedestrian-friendly development. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions for Travis? Okay, thank you, Travis. I am going to open the hearing. We have Jennifer Ashton, Michael Birch, and Elin Conover on the phone, representing the applicant. Do we have any questions for them? Councilmember Cox?
I was wondering, are there any prohibitions to any particular types of businesses here, such as alcohol sales, bars, etc.? One of the concerns I have is that the existing building there currently has a vape shop, and it's within easy walking distance of Millbrook High School. And I'm a little concerned about that type of development so close to schools. And I was wondering if there are any prohibitions offered regarding, different kinds of establishments or any prohibitions like for adult establishments or anything like that?
This is Jennifer Ashton on behalf of the applicant. We are not proposing any use prohibitions with this rezoning request. Basically, we're just trying to expand the square footage and also to have any new parking spaces be constructed in the same orientation as the already existing building on site. But to answer your specific question, no, there are no use prohibitions proposed at this time.
Okay. I would have liked to have seen some prohibitions given the proximity to the high school.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, I'm going to then close the hearing. Somebody like to make a motion? Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 17, 2021 contained in the agenda materials and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed? Clerk, that would be 7-1 with Councilmember Cox in opposition. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. We're back to virtual, and this was a special meeting. Appreciate y'all being able to make your schedules work. So thank you. And
Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry, what?
Madam, I have a question.
Yes,
I was wondering, because from my understanding, we're not allowed to condition out vape shops and sweepstakes. I was wondering if our city attorney could just look into that and update us in the manager's report. Because that's been a concern throughout my district, so.
Especially the sweepstakes shops.
Right.
Okay, that would be good information to get. Thank you very much. I know there are a number of committee meetings tomorrow, so we'll see you back on, I was going to say back here, but back on the screen tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.